Thank you for joining me today. My name is Leslie Wilson. For the last 18 years, I've been deeply involved in disaster response and recovery. In April of 2023, I was invited to give a breakout session on my work in Ukraine at the virtual conference of the International Association of Emergency Managers. However, the roots for this work go back much farther. Beginning in 2010, much of my pro bono service as a vulnerable population specialist carried me to the autonomous region of Tajikistan at the northern end of the Himalayas, where the ongoing need, like an unending disaster, is so great. It was in these villages that I began weaving together my emergency management skills with over 30 years of off-grid permaculture experience on a remote island in Lake Superior. The goal? To create a better, more durable existence for impoverished villagers in the Pamir Mountains and hopefully across the Afghan border, where the need was even greater. While my small Tajik team never gained entry into Afghanistan, and rampant corruption eventually forced me out of the country at the end of 2021, those years gave me the best preparation possible for the work I now do in liberated villages of Ukraine. So, with the start of the full-scale invasion in 2022, I had an opportunity to bring a broad spectrum of skills and experience to bear on some of the most formidable problems facing Ukraine today. I've discovered a niche of work to last a lifetime, and my life has not been the same since. I hope you'll not only join me on this video update, but that many of you will consider ways that you too can apply your skills and resources to meet and partner with indomitable Ukrainians in their struggle to overcome some of the greatest challenges to freedom and security in our world today. Razom, a popular Ukrainian word that has taken on global meaning. Together, we can help Ukraine survive this war and reinvent itself for a brighter future in the European Union. The image before you is Verkhovna Rada, Ukraine's Capitol building, where members of parliament conduct the business of war and survival. Beyond is the heart of the Ukrainian government, shrouded in wartime darkness every night, in full awareness of the ongoing threat to its very existence as a nation. I arrived in Kyiv close to midnight by taxi from the train station, with a pair of backpacks and portable wheels, most everything I'd need for the next 3 months in Poland and Moldova. I'd finally secured an apartment in Kharkiv for a base of operations, the closest place to a home nowadays. But still unable to secure a work visa, I'd have to leave Ukraine for 3 months, again, before returning to establish the first resilient village. I thought I'd found a well-situated hotel at a reasonable price. However, I had second thoughts as the taxi stopped on a back street. Darkness everywhere. Ominous-looking guys staring at us from the shadows. I was very grateful the driver led the way into the hotel. In the near-total darkness, I couldn't even distinguish the entrance for all the barricades and tape. Construction work, I concluded. Then suddenly I caught a glint of razor wire. I veered sharply to avoid it. When I lurched abruptly, one of the men bolted out of the shadows, rifle ready. The whole atmosphere took on new meaning as I realized they were Ukrainian soldiers, watching our every move. I could finally relax when I entered my room, dropped my bags, and opened the curtains to my sealed-off patio. This photo you see was the view out that window. For my few days there, it brought into focus the life and death struggle the nation of Ukraine was locked in, the reasons for linking my future to Ukraine's future, and why these recent months had become a culmination of my life's work. I plan to remain here, to be part of Ukraine's struggle to survive, rebuild, and reinvent itself, to take its hard-won place among the great free nations of the world. First, I'll share some personal insights in an overview of Ukraine's disaster response landscape. From living and working in Chernovtsi and Lviv in the quiet western region, to Kharkiv in the war-torn east, and the border nations. Then finally to the villages between the Chernobyl radioactive exclusion zone and Kyiv. In December, I moved there to the village of Kolensy, where I'll begin building the first resilient community. I'll present a few highlights of the Resilient Village project evolving over time. Developed in the refugee summer of 2022 in an effort to stem the tide of families feeling forced to leave their homeland. The request from the Ukrainian Army for help improving living conditions in the trenches as many soldiers and civilians faced winter with little heat. Insights from discussions with a deputy director in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. The struggle to find a village to begin the work. The future begins in Kolensy, a village about an hour's drive north of Kyiv, invaded and later liberated in the early months of the full-scale invasion. In our recently purchased property, we are building a small, close-knit community, including babushkas in great need, mostly homebound widows in their 70s, 80s, and even 90s, with no reliable support system. Highest priority, introducing Ukraine to the rocket mass heating system, a desperately needed innovation where many rely on inefficient wood stoves and suffer from the inability to afford the massive amounts of firewood required. We'll gradually build tiny cottages and an R&D center. Here we'll develop off-grid technologies, a business incubator and training center with the goal to empower similar rural communities throughout Ukraine and beyond. We'll take a hard look at some of the many challenges of working internationally in a war zone. From a personal standpoint, it is best to work as part of a qualified organization or team. Should it ever be considered by an individual? Well, we'll look at unique aspects, good and bad, to working in a war zone without the usual safeguards. At various crossroads, I revisit a critical question. Is it possible to make meaningful contributions without being a burden on the existing systems, now under such tremendous strain? The answers often require great flexibility and radical changes, either in the approach or even the work itself. Not just out-of-the-box thinking, but rethinking the box itself. Then we'll look at the Razom commitment. What we together can offer such communities here in Ukraine and around the world. Together, Razom, let's see if we can combine our collective knowledge to partner in solutions to the Ukrainian situation. Because without ongoing help from other nations, Ukraine would have ceased to exist. We must never let it regress to that dangerous tipping point again. Let's apply the collective knowledge of emergency managers to a global setting in the midst of a brutal war with far-reaching ramifications for our world. Let's lay out the regional map. We've seen the usual entities respond to both the humanitarian crisis and the military clashes. All of this has had far-reaching global implications. Let's just make a few broad brushstrokes to see how this whole scenario is playing out. The major players that you see on this image in global humanitarian response include many familiar names, such as UNICEF, the World Food Program, and the International Red Cross/Red Crescent. Their usual approaches, with varying degrees of effectiveness in a given situation, have been overwhelmed by the sheer magnitude of this complex, life-threatening, ongoing situation over a vast swath of this large country. Add to this humanitarian problems spilling over into neighboring nations and across the globe, with the overwhelming exodus of civilians, the disruption of crucial food supplies, the crippling of the energy industry, the drain of resources from an increasingly fissured coalition of partner nations with no end in sight, to name a few. This resulted in a quagmire of problems from the onset for these veterans of disaster response. Many major aid entities spent the first months just trying to assess the situation, basically spinning their wheels as they struggled to began to address manageable chunks of selected issues, each intertwined with additional complexities in a continually evolving situation. Only the magnets that you see here could be effectively addressed. Locations like the Irpins, the Buchas, Bakhmut, Kyiv, Kharkiv, Kherson, places that are now household names thanks to the international media. Often the standard aid is given to the standard recipients, like medical supplies to hospitals. Even then, general supplies often do not address the specific needs of each recipient. Money thrown at this situation in vast quantities often lacks direction and can fall into, shall we say, the wrong hands. And in the constant changing complexity of the ongoing conflict, these problems are in a constant state of flux and exacerbated with more added all the time. This leaves much of Ukraine's ongoing distress trapped in small pockets of anonymity, virtually untouched by response and recovery efforts. Lesser-known needs, often overlooked or sidelined for later. Into the vacuum of response poured a flood of ad hoc humanitarians, just minor players that you see here, judging by resources, but the sheer quantity and flexibility give them a critical role in the overall efforts. We see this in many disasters of all sorts and sizes. Ukrainian and foreign, some just average people with no special skills. They sprang up by the thousands, reminiscent of the civilian boats rescuing Allied soldiers after the Battle of Dunkirk. An undercurrent of response meeting almost invisible needs. New nonprofits, websites, Facebook, and Instagram pages popped up, pleading for support, money, resources, volunteers. In the early days, there was very little organization to the heartfelt outpouring chaos. For a while, you could catch an international train into Lviv or Kyiv. All civilian air traffic had ceased by then, and remains so as the war continues. There would be volunteers at the station, often UNICEF, eager to pair you up with an organization in need of help. Many were short-lived. Others continually retool, mature, adjust to the ever-changing needs. Let's look at some of those little yellow dots of response. Ukrainians and Europeans from many nearby countries drive into danger zones to help civilians fleeing their city-turned battlefield, or bring medical supplies to the front lines. These delivery trucks often morph into makeshift ambulances to rescue wounded soldiers, delivering them to the nearest aid station. Many of these civilians, volunteers, were motivated by news stories like Red Cross convoys poised to rescue civilians trapped but brought to a standstill because safe passage could not be guaranteed. Or Lviv Kitchen, where a pair of older women decided to prepare meals for frontline troops. A young Britisher, arriving at the Lviv train station, was funneled into their small operation. Even though they had no common language in the beginning, as he persevered, worked hard, he was basically adopted by the ladies and has gone on to help expand their operation, giving the work a voice in social media, peppered with occasional stories in the international press that helps grow the organization. To help channel all this volunteer exuberance, several overarching authorities have emerged over time, like the Ukrainian government's humanitarian hub. But these often seem bogged down by the huge need. And always there is the language barrier slowing everything down. One last thought. With this chaos, we also need to factor in opportunists and bad actors of all sorts. They tarnish the image of others, resulting in suspicion and limitations, eventually affecting all these minor players, good and bad. And the majors are certainly not immune to such infections, but tend to have more safeguards built into their vetting and accountability processes. However, when a cancer runs loose in entities wielding millions, even billions of dollars in aid, the consequences are often far greater. Let's rename this slide, My Journey into Nomadic Minimalism. I should first preface this by saying that up until a couple months before the full-scale invasion began, my pro bono work for 11 years had been concentrated in or for the nation of Tajikistan. Work very similar to what I'm doing now. Helping vulnerable populations in the Pamir Mountains bordering China and Afghanistan involved finding ways to improve living conditions and help village economies. I frequently served as a liaison between villages with whom my small Tajik team and I had built reputations based on mutual respect and understanding. This gave me the opportunity to develop relationships with large international organizations, finding strategic roles that helped fill in gaps in humanitarian aid in the most remote rural locations. This all came to an abrupt end in December of 2021. My most recent work visa was not approved. Not denied, just bounced around in limbo until events back in America finally forced me to break the deadlock and return home. It can be very challenging to work with the Tajik government. And again, this points out one of the difficulties of working solo or in a small group instead of with one of the large organizations, which, once again, I wasn't able to put together. But then Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine. And once again, I had the opportunity to apply my disaster skills and experience working with vulnerable populations, this time in a nation at war. Not able to find an umbrella organization to work with again, I blazed a trail where help was most needed. Many possibilities to choose from. Forced to use the 90-day visa-free option, I coined a new term to describe my lifestyle nowadays: nomadic minimalism. The new way of life began in Romania. Back in America, I was not sure where my efforts would turn at this point in my semi-retired career. enter Ukraine. As I followed the unfolding humanitarian crisis, I planned ways that I might position myself, not in Ukraine. The hurdles to get permission proved to be insurmountable from America, but in a neighboring country. Basically, voluntourism while testing the waters for living abroad. Starting with a Romanian Airbnb farmhouse, I volunteered at a nonprofit warehouse on the border run by Ukrainian women, then connected with a second group helping refugees, and finally ended my first month with the opportunity to cross into Ukraine, thanks to this last humanitarian team. Ukraine, Trip 1. I spent 3 months at an Airbnb in Old Europe tourist area of Chernivtsi. Far from the front lines, I found an excellent setting for studying the language, culture, and possibilities for work more aligned with my skills and background. I connected with a couple from Kharkiv who shuttled supplies back to family, friends, and volunteers. Their help was instrumental in developing the Resilient Village project. They even offered to sponsor my work visa, since they were officially a branch of an international humanitarian organization. So after 90 days, it was time to leave for another country, where I would hopefully procure the 1-year work visa at a Ukrainian embassy. It cannot be done from inside Ukraine. Moldova. Instead, this became the start of a new 90-day nomadic period devoted to building my website and social media platform. The purpose was to share information that Ukrainians could use directly to help alleviate their situation. I was starting to specialize in off-grid skills, especially heating. Now into autumn, there was great concern for winter survival with relentless attacks on the infrastructure. Not just for the people in Ukraine, but for me as I returned in late December. Hungary. Since this was my first stay of any great length in Europe, I spent a month in the Hungarian countryside, near the vineyards that were home to my mother's family. I was developing a fallback plan to explore citizenship by ancestry, just in case. I continued to pursue partnerships that could further the project, and while there were promising discussions, progress hinged on my return to Ukraine. Poland. Realizing that Poland was hub for much of the humanitarian activity, I made my final move there before re-entry. Living a month at the Medica border crossing, I developed relationships with groups like UNICEF and IAEM, connected with a number of small independent operations, as well as Ukrainians crossing in both directions. I began compiling a matrix of contacts, the kind of work they did, and ways that we might help each other, very similar to what I did in Tajikistan for many years. Ukraine Trip 2. On Christmas Eve, I caught the international train back into Ukraine. Lviv is an excellent location for many humanitarian enterprises. Some use it as a jump-off point to locations closer to the front. Others maintain it as their home base for their time in Ukraine, sometimes returning repeatedly with supplies and services from their home country. Eventually, however, I knew I needed to get closer to liberated areas for locating a village willing to be the pilot project. So I moved to Kharkiv for the winter. By now I realized that I needed a place to call home, where I could permanently stash my belongings, now spread across Chernivtsi, Lviv, and Kharkiv. Out of necessity, my life had become that of a minimalist. Given all the travel since long international trips began in 2010, but even a minimalist needs one place to house items not needed during the frequent trips. It wasn't much, a rundown small apartment in a sprawling Soviet-era complex, but the cost was less than $200 a month, and it was mine, assuming a stray missile didn't hit. Poland. Despite significant forward movement in the project and several elusive promises of a visa forthcoming, I was forced to leave for another 90 days. This time, however, I had a place equipped and waiting for my return. And so in March 2023, the work shifted once again to spreading the word, building my network, and now solidifying connections with villages on my short list, where I hope to begin work upon my return. This period in exile wrapped up in Moldova, from where I was able to take one of the recently restarted trains back to Kyiv. Ukraine Trip 3. Before returning, I had established a partnership with a small Ukrainian outreach team based in Kyiv. Once or twice a week, they traveled up to hard-hit, liberated villages near the Chernobyl radioactive exclusion zone. After making my first day trip with them to drop off regular food and supplies to dozens of mostly homebound babushkas in nearly a dozen villages, I was invited to join the team. Their base of operations is in the small village of Kalensi. With help from some of my friends back in America, as well as their own supporters, including the Glow Mission nonprofit, we purchased a property with 2 small residential buildings and a couple acres of open land. The team had been planning to establish the first non-Orthodox church there and provide safe housing for babushkas in great need. This dovetailed beautifully with the first location for building a resilient village. Finally, I was able to unite my small pile of luggage into 2 other cities under one roof in Kyiv. Unfortunately, I still had no visa, so there they remain, awaiting my return. Poland and Moldova. This latest exile, a few weeks in Poland, mostly in Moldova, ends in late November, with hopefully a final move to the village of Kalensi in early December. Winter. A bad time to finally start developing the rocket mass heating systems, key to winter survival for so many. Thus, I'm about to launch a media campaign now that these videos, the refurbished website, and Glow Mission, a 501c3, are in place. Thank you for watching part 1 of this 2-part presentation, Razom, Forging the Future Together in Ukraine. I hope you'll join me for part 2, where we'll delve into the various aspects of the resilient village concept as it comes to life in the first liberated village, Kalensi. I hope you'll consider being a part of Ukraine's challenging but certain rise to a new free nation status, a strong partner in the European Union and Free World Coalition of Nations. If you, your business, or organization is interested in being part of the rapidly expanding solutions to the devastating destruction, in either a voluntary or professional capacity, let's start the conversation. And if Resilient Villages Project, now unfolding in liberated rural communities, is a project that you would like to partner in, please reach out to me. My email is llwilsonglobal@gmail.com. Website is roadmaptolife.org. YouTube you've already discovered, thank you. And check out my professional profile at linkedin.com. Or consider contributing to the ongoing work through the Glow Mission. Given the founder's personal interest in aiding Ukraine, and our team in particular, they are sending 100% of your donations directly to our work in Ukraine. You can scan the QR code on this page or go directly to Glow Missions and check out the Widows and Elderly Support Project page. Be sure to scroll down to the powerful video to see and hear several of our babushkas describe their experiences when the Russian tank column invaded their peaceful villages. You can click on the donation link there. Currently, you may request that your donation be used for a particular outreach of our work, if you like. Just add a personal note when you fill in the donation form. The Glow Mission is a 501c3 nonprofit. All donations are tax deductible. I look forward to seeing what we, as a community engaged in emergency services, can do to forge a new future together with Ukraine.